Gunpla Sword is a fairy tale at the very bottom of the universe. Dreams in a wasteland, a series overrun with violence, a utopia for mech fans, all on a planet known as the Endless Illusion. A dude rocks a mighty outfit. His name is Vaughn. A young girl tolerates said dude. Her name is Wendy. Along the way there is danger, there is strife, but there's never a dull moment. Yes, that's a joke you'll only get if you've seen at least the intro to a few episodes of Gunpla Sword. But before we get too far, allow me to say, hello everyone and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer and today we'll be taking a look at Gunpla Sword, an anime that originally aired in 2005 that has some, well, rather interesting mechanical designs to say the least. Before we get into Vaughn's stylish choice of a black tuxedo in this universe, let's talk about how you can get yourself some own style and threads from the Gunpla Network Teespring store. That's right, we have our own merch store over on Teespring, so if you want to get yourself a Gunpla Network hoodie, shirt, sticker, or mug, you can find them over there, and we've got some new designs that even feature everyone's favorite mascot, Network-chan. Be sure to check that out after this, or scroll down just a little bit and you can see some previews down below. Now on to the story of Vaughn, Wendy, and Dan? Oh wait, who's Dan, you ask? Well, that's a rather interesting story. You see, before our boss man Danik, or Dan for short, talked to me about Gunpla Sword and how cool it would be to do a video covering it, I knew exactly two things about it. One, that I had been actually mistaking it for Gungrave, and I guess Gungrave for Gungrave. And then this robot had a really cool robot Damashi figure. And to be fair, I actually thought it was from something like 5-Star Stories or something similar to that. But much like our boss man, this sleek mech is named Dan. However, the sword-wielding space robot's actually named Dan of Thursday, and there's two N's in Dan, but I guess you could kind of do the same thing for Danik. Regardless, it is a really strange name for a mech, right? Sadly to say, I'm pretty positive that the vast majority of you are in a similar situation with Gunpla Sword. Despite having a pretty solid team behind it, it would end up airing within a few months of one of the most notable mecha shows in recent memory, Eureka 7. Admittedly, it's really hard to compete with the story of Gecko State, but Gunpla Sword does have a cult following and even ranks pretty highly on most platforms. While Japanese TV ratings are nearly impossible to find here in the US, sites like IMDb and MyAnimeList rank it 7 out of 10 most of the time, and Crunchyroll has it just over 4 out of 5 stars. All these user reviews means when someone actually takes the time to watch it, they generally like it. So why didn't it stick back in 2005? Well, 3 simple words, my friends. Mecha Space Western. If I were to give you an elevator pitch for the series, it would go one of two ways. One way would be either a space western set in space Australia with a bunch of weird mechs instead of kangaroos, and the other would be Proto-Code Geass minus Lelouch from Nunnally's perspective. Pretty strange elevator pitches to say the least. You see, Gunpla Sword is in a strange place in history. It had missed the heyday of the space westerns of the 1990s, and well, the mecha ship had long since set sail for anything that wasn't Gundam. Sure, every couple of years, or every 5 to 10 years, we'd get a cool mecha series, but gone were the days of the channels being packed with giant robots. This series is a really interesting study in homage in, most notably, the space westerns I had mentioned. Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, Outlaw Star, and Pokemon? And that can't be right, I didn't write that down. No, that's right, the story is told in a very Pokemon-like way, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, let's look at Vaughn. He's not as suave as Spike Spiegel, or as goofy as Vash the Stampede, and he's not as rugged as Gene Starwind. But he does don the hero with a tragic past trope really well. Without going too far into it, Vaughn is seeking revenge for the murder of his wife. This is his sole mission in life, but he's lost within that mission. Just aimlessly wandering from town to town, just kind of surviving. Much like any of our favorite space western heroes, the Vaughn we see isn't the man he used to be or wanted to be. He's so consumed by this loss, he's numb to the world, and only ends up really doing the right thing in the last moments, sometimes out of a sense of ironic comedy. He's the lesser well represented Spike Spiegel, if you will. Spike we get a lot more depth to, but Vaughn is a good way of showing the same thing. The only emotion we really ever see Vaughn exhibit is rage, anger, and it's outbursts. It's never a consistent thing. So we get to see Vaughn just ground down to nothing. And we don't get that all at once. We get little bits here and there of Vaughn's past and what's going on in the world around him, as the world itself is almost just as interesting as Vaughn is. Well, there's no grand conspiracy we find really up until the end. We get bits and pieces of the main antagonist, the Claw, and his story. This takes us, the viewer, on a very interesting ride, not only storytelling-wise, but visually. You see, unlike the worlds of Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, or Outlaw Star, the Endless Illusion is almost made up entirely of tropey vacation towns. So, there's your Pokemon for you. For an example, Evergreen, the first town we're introduced to, is all Western in theme. The next town we see is a more Old Mexico, Latin America West. We have a town on a bridge, a coastal town. We have a town that is a transportation hub. That's just Grand Central Station, the town. We have a town that's a port, and then we have a town that's bikinis. That one's not important. We won't talk about that one. Needless to say, very Pokemon-esque. Well, Pokemon maybe not didn't embody the same level of gimmicky. Each town that had a gym was defined by that gym and the type of Pokemon in said gym. So this kind of helps you not only remember the towns, maybe not by name, but what their gimmick was, who was there, what kind of people, because they all kind of exist in a vacuum. There's really not a lot of cross-contamination between the different cities or towns, and that allows for each setting to have its own unique set of characters. All of these characters that end up being unlikely allies, much to Vaughn's disdain, end up journeying with them, and we get to see this mishmash of cultures, really. Now, of course, it's not super deep again, but it is really interesting to see how these characters interact coming from different backgrounds and just generally how their towns operated, as none of these towns were usually super large or super populous. Adopting this somewhat strange method of world building and storytelling allows the writers to not only provide a wide range of goofy characters, but also insert a ton of different visual styles in terms of themes, clothing, architecture, and technology. And yes, that means every town has its own distinct type of mechs. The mechanical design in the show is wild, to say the very least. We've got some mech tanks a la something similar to Mech Warrior. We've got boats that are mechs, we've got subs that are mechs, we've got digging machines that kind of have a Voltom's vibe called Vulcan, and we just have cars, like just straight cars, and a lot of other things in between. One of the most appealing things about Gun X Sword's world is its general lack of consistency, not just in tone or visual themes, but also in its terms of seriousness. For instance, we get the hot-blooded super robot Gao Gai Gar inspired episode 4 to episode 5 that just follows Wendy around on her troubled journey to try to get medicine for Vaughn. She even gets attacked multiple times, and it's really just personal story that's a lot more serious in its tone than what we had gotten the episode prior. Well, this could be seen as the show trying to fit a few too many things in. I think it speaks to what people liked about the older space westerns. They were never overly serious or too goofy. Now, if you want to think back to Cowboy Bebop for a minute, we go from meeting Faye Valentine and Ein to Ballad of the Fallen Angels, like one of the best hook episodes of an anime ever. We go from somewhat still a fairly serious but mostly kind of goofy Faye and Ein, to Spike's backstory and what happened with Vicious and all of that. Lacking the general backstory that something like Cowboy Bebop had, and trying to tie together these seemingly unrelated episodes, is how we get to see the regular Vaughn, which largely is numb, but still we get to see him. Between him asking for all the condiments, or Spike Spiegel asking or complaining about the lack of beef, these are just the regular characters in their everyday lives, and that's kind of what we want to see out of a space western. These moments, these calm before the storm moments, help give us context to these tense battles or fateful reunions. We get to look back and see the evolution from someone like Spike, who is kind of chill and just kind of drifting, to the numb Vaughn, who is kind of still drifting, to ultimately the successor to Vaughn in the bored Lelouch from Code Geass. Well, Vaughn does share some wacky hand-to-hand combat styles of Spike Spiegel, just not as well animated. He's definitely the inspiration for Lelouch's ridiculously long limbs. And of course, the very Gao-Gai-Gar mech design from episode 4 and those long limbs come to us courtesy of Takehiro Kimura, who had a hand in all 3 of those properties. Now, speaking of Kimura, as I said earlier, this team was actually pretty stacked. This wasn't just a bunch of first-time people or people who really just hadn't worked on anything major. As far as Takehiro Kimura, he helped go on to work on all of the Code Geass franchise, R1, R2, Akito the Exiled, Nunnally in Wonderland, and of course the movie Lelouch of the Resurrection as character design and chief animation director for most of those. He also worked on G Gundam as the chief animation director, SD Gundam Mark I as the character designer, and Gao-Gai-Gar as character designer and chief animation director. Now, if we go back to director and someone who's largely credited with a lot of the storyboard for the series, Goro Taniguchi, we actually see he'd worked on Gundam X as a storyboarder and episode director. All of Code Geass, he's pretty much he's credited as the original creator, from R1 and R2 to the movie Lelouch of the Resurrection to the OVA series Akito the Exile. He also worked on Gear Fighter Dino as a storyboarder, G Gundam as a storyboarder and episode director, and S Cried as a storyboard and director. The script was penned by Hideyuki Kurata, who also had worked on things like, or has gone on to work on things like Drifters as the script and series composition person, Goblin Slayer, Samurai Flamenco, and My Little Sister Can't Be This Cute. Wait a second, one of these things is not like the other here. In terms of some of the more significant storyboard team members that weren't the director, we also have Sanaga Tsukasa, who also would go on to work on Code Geass R1 and R2, as well as Gundam Seed Stargazer. Now, the voice acting in English is pretty awesome as well, or at least pretty good. I wouldn't say maybe awesome, but it's good, it's passable, it's fine. And if you want to listen to the English dub, you can find it over on Funimation right now, streaming for free. But you'll be greeted by Vaughn as David Vincent, who you may recognize as Gilgamesh from Fate, or Naz from IBO. And Wendy is Stephanie Sheh, who was Usagi from Sailor Moon, or Sailor Moon, Lady Kaguya from Code Geass, or Hime from Bleach. Now I'd like to circle back for a moment to my second elevator pitch, the proto-Code Geass from Nunnally's perspective. I make this comparison not just because this team would largely go on to create Code Geass, or the music cues are absolutely interchangeable, but because Wendy is a very, very similar character to Nunnally. They're both the hopeful driving light for the character that's stuck in the past, and that's how the narrative is driven in Gun X Sword. Of course, in Code Geass, it's driven by Lelouch's journey for vengeance that at least takes up most of R1, in which he's focused on the past and getting the revenge for what had happened to him in the past. Kind of like Vaughn does. But in Gun X Sword, we kind of see the story at least halfway from Wendy's perspective, giving us a more hopeful I wouldn't say jovial, but at least somewhat more lighthearted and occasionally goofy story than we get in Code Geass a lot of the time. It's significantly less complex, and Code Geass has its goofy moments, but it is mostly tonally a lot more serious than what we get here. Now, before anyone starts commenting, yes, Vaughn and Lelouch are incredibly different characters, and really wouldn't be the one-to-one comparison if we were actually looking to do so. I actually think we'd see a much more similar story if we had post-Yuffie death Suzaku partnered with Nunnally. I think both of those characters are very similar, and while Suzaku is still more emotive, he is entirely rage-filled and resembles Vaughn in a lot of his angry outbursts. Now, yes, technically, Suzaku gets revenge on Lelouch multiple times throughout the series and kind of ultimately into the movie, but generally speaking, Suzaku right in those moments, right after Yuffie's death, is almost Vaughn epitomized. Now, of course, he does go back to a much more serious tone, much less so than his goofy self before, but generally speaking, that is kind of where I see Vaughn shine through in Code Geass, or a prototype Mad Suzaku shine through in Gun X Sword. Now, all this is well and good, but we're a Gundam channel, right? Well, don't you worry, I gotcha. In the context of our channel, in the context of our fandom, in the context of Gundam, Gun X Sword is incredibly different and just vastly out there comparative to most Gundam series, even some of the crazier ones, and really the closest you would get, you would have to look back to the previous work of the people on the team. You have some G Gundam with a lot of the variety and some of the more super robot-esque themes, and some, to an extent, the world of Gundam X. So it's kind of post-apocalyptic, and well, this isn't necessarily post-apocalyptic. It does have kind of similar vibes where, at least for a while, the technology isn't all that fantastic. It seems like, oh cool, we understand firearms, and sure, there's a couple of armors running around, but they seem fairly unique and isolated and largely customized. It'd just kind of be like if the world governments broke down and someone got a tank. It'd be a similar concept, and it's the same thing with Gundam X and mobile suits. But generally speaking, neither one of those really fit one-to-one or very even close, honestly. I say if you liked either of those shows, there are things in Gun X Sword that would absolutely carry over, but generally speaking, Gun X Sword is for you if you want a break from Gundam, if you kind of want to get out of war drama for just a little bit. This is a light-hearted romp that you won't necessarily have to invest yourself in so much. It's not got the complicated political subplots of Gundam, or even to a similar extent Code Geass. It's largely just a story about a man trying to get revenge, and then it gets a little more complicated towards the end. But generally speaking, Gun X Sword is a lot of fun. Now, would I say watch this? Absolutely. If you have the time, you can watch it for free in the US, at least over on Funimation's website. If you're outside of the US, I'm not quite sure exactly, but I'm sure you can find it somewhere streaming, hopefully legally for free. It is well worth a watch. Even if you can find the DVDs or Blu-rays at a reasonable price, I would say for a mecha show, this is pretty unique. It stands out amongst most of its contemporaries, and honestly has a very good reason to have a cult following. So if you're looking for something different, absolutely do check it out. And let us know in the comments down below any questions or thoughts you've had if you've seen the show, or if you're thinking about watching the show. I'll do my best to answer them, and of course, our boss man Danik will also have a fair amount of knowledge about this. And let us know what you think about these videos. This was actually really fun to make, and it's been a while since I've sat down and just watched a series, so I've really enjoyed getting to do this. I'm really excited about it. But let us know in the comments down below if you have any other ideas as well. I've been the Spicer for the Gunpla Network. As always, friends, stay safe, keep on building, and keep on watching.